Jack Morrison could feel the sweat running down his back as he watched the 3 patrol ships close in on his cargo vessel. He had been running supplies between the outer colonies for 15 years, and he knew what trouble looked like. The white and blue ships of the Galactic Trade Authority had been following him for 3 days through the asteroid field near the Kepler system. Now they had him trapped at the fuel station on Haven's Edge. The Iron Horse was not much to look at. She was an old cargo ship with patches welded over old battle scars and engines that made too much noise. But she was fast when she needed to. And her cargo hold could hide things that other ships could not. Jack had spent years making small changes to her, adding secret spaces and false walls that even the best scanners had trouble finding. He sat in his pilot's chair and watched the patrol ships move into position around the fuel station. There was nowhere to run now. The asteroids blocked every escape route, and the station's defense guns were already turning toward his ship. Jack ran his rough hands through his gray hair and let out a long breath. At 45 years old, he had learned when to fight and when to wait for a better chance. The communication system crackled to life. A woman's voice came through, cold and professional. "This is Captain Lisa Martinez of the Galactic Trade Authority. Jack Morrison, you are ordered to shut down your engines and prepare for boarding. Any attempt to flee will be met with force." Jack picked up the microphone. "Well, hello there, Captain Martinez. I was wondering when you folks would catch up with me. Come on aboard. I've got fresh coffee if you want some." He could almost hear her frown through the radio. "Cut the jokes, Morrison. We know what you're carrying," Jack smiled to himself. If only she knew. He watched through his viewport as a boarding shuttle left the lead patrol ship and headed for his cargo bay. The shuttle was full of armed officers in black armor, their helmets reflecting the light from the nearby star. Jack knew most of them would be young and eager to prove themselves. They probably thought they were about to arrest a dangerous criminal. The shuttle docked with a loud clang that shook the whole ship. Jack heard boots on metal as the boarding team moved through his ship. He stood up slowly, making sure his hands were visible. The last thing he wanted was for some nervous officer to shoot him. Before he could explain what was really happening, Captain Martinez was the first one through the door to his bridge. She was a woman in her 30s with short black hair and steel gray eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore the blue uniform of the Trade Authority with perfect creases and shiny buttons. Her hand rested on the gun at her side, but she had not drawn it yet. "Jack Morrison," she said, her voice echoing in the small space. "You are under arrest for breaking Galactic Trade Code 47B. You have been carrying restricted materials across sector boundaries without proper permits." Jack leaned against the wall and raised his hands. "Now, Captain, I think there might be some confusion here. My cargo papers are all in order. I'm just carrying medical supplies to the mining colonies in the Vega system." Martinez pulled out a data pad and read from it. "Our intelligence says you entered restricted space near the Zephyrian border 2 weeks ago. We believe you are smuggling weapons-grade plutonium to rebel groups." Jack almost laughed. The Zephyrians were humanity's worst enemies. They were a race of reptile-like aliens who had been at war with the human colonies for 20 years. The idea that he would sell weapons to rebels in their territory was crazy. But he could not tell Martinez what he had really been doing there. "Not yet. Captain, I think your intelligence might be wrong," Jack said. "I've never sold weapons to anyone. I'm just a cargo runner trying to make an honest living." Martinez did not look convinced. She gestured to her team, and they began to spread out through the ship. Jack heard them moving through the corridors, their scanners beeping as they searched for hidden compartments. They were good at their job, but Jack hoped they would not be good enough. Sergeant Danny Brooks was a young officer with bright eyes and quick hands. He had been with the Trade Authority for only 2 years, but he was already making a name for himself. He moved through the ship like a hunter, checking every corner and testing every wall. His scanner was the newest model, able to detect even the smallest hidden spaces. "This ship has been modified," Brooks called out to Martinez. "The cargo hold is smaller than it should be for a ship this size. There are extra walls that don't match the original blueprints. Martinez nodded. Keep looking. Morrison has been too clever for too long. There has to be something here. Jack watched the officers work and felt his heart beating faster. The secret compartment behind the engine room was well hidden, but these people were professionals. If they found it, everything would change. But maybe that would not be such a bad thing. Maybe it was time for the truth to come out, Lieutenant. Amy Sullivan was the team's medical officer. She was a small woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. She had joined the Trade Authority to help people, not to arrest smugglers. But she did her job well, and her scanner was just as good as anyone else's. "Captain," Sullivan called from the engine room. "I'm getting strange readings back here. The power distribution doesn't match what it should be for a ship this size." Martinez walked quickly to the engine room. "What kind of readings?" "Life support systems," Sullivan said, frowning at her scanner. "But they're not connected to the main ship. It's like there's a whole separate area back here that we can't see." Jack felt his stomach drop. They were getting close. He watched as Brooks pulled out a plasma cutter and began to work on the wall behind the main engine. Sparks flew as the hot beam cut through the metal. The smell of burning steel filled the air. "Captain Martinez," Brooks said, his voice tight with excitement. "I think I found something big." The wall section fell away with a crash, revealing a dark space beyond. Martinez shined her light into the opening and gasped. The hidden compartment was huge, running almost the length of the ship, but it was not filled with weapons or stolen goods. It was filled with stasis pods. Dozens of them, each one containing a small, still form. The pods glowed with soft blue light, and the sound of life support systems hummed in the background. Martinez stepped into the hidden room, her light playing over the rows of pods. "Dear God," whispered Lieutenant Sullivan as she followed Martinez into the compartment. "Captain, these are children, human children." Jack watched the officers' faces change from suspicion to shock to horror. The children in the pods were unconscious but alive, their faces peaceful in artificial sleep. They were all young, maybe 6 to 14 years old. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and many of them looked too thin. "Morrison," Martinez's voice was deadly quiet. "Where did you get these children?" "For the first time since the arrest began?" Jack's calm expression cracked. His hands clenched into fists and his jaw tightened. The easy smile disappeared from his face, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "I found them on Zarian Prime," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "In a Zephyrian slave market? They were being sold to the highest bidder like pieces of meat." The silence that followed was complete. The only sound was the hum of the life support systems keeping the children alive. Martinez stared at Jack, trying to understand what she was hearing. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that you rescued these children from alien slavers?" Jack nodded. 43 kids, all taken from colony raids over the past 6 months. The Zephyrians don't just kill our people anymore, Captain. They take the survivors and sell them like animals. The hidden compartment was larger than anyone had expected. Captain Martinez stepped carefully between the rows of stasis pods, her flashlight casting long shadows on the metal walls. Each pod contained a child, their small faces peaceful in artificial sleep. The sight made her stomach turn. Sergeant Danny Brooks was the first to recover from the shock. He pulled out his scanner and began taking readings from the nearest pod. The device beeped softly as it analyzed the life support systems keeping the children alive. "Captain," Brooks said, his voice shaking slightly, "these pods are military grade. High-end life support, temperature control, everything. Someone spent a lot of money to keep these kids safe." Lieutenant Amy Sullivan knelt beside a pod containing a girl who could not have been more than 8 years old. The child's blonde hair was matted and dirty, and her thin arms showed signs of old bruises. Sullivan's medical scanner trembled in her hands as she took readings. "Vital signs are stable," Sullivan reported. "But, Captain, these children have been drugged. The scanner shows traces of sedatives in their blood, probably to keep them quiet and compliant." Jack Morrison stood in the doorway, watching the officers examine the children he had risked everything to save. His weathered face was hard as stone, but his eyes showed the pain he had been carrying for weeks. "They drugged them during transport," Jack said quietly, "made them easier to handle. The Zephyrians don't care if the kids are awake or asleep as long as they stay alive long enough to be sold." Martinez turned to face him, her professional mask slipping for a moment. "Morrison, you need to tell us everything, from the beginning. How did you even know these children existed?" Jack moved into the compartment, his boots echoing on the metal floor. He stopped beside a pod containing a boy with dark hair and a face that reminded him of his own nephew back on Earth. "I've been building contacts in the underground for years," Jack said. "Information brokers, black market traders, even some aliens who hate what the Zephyrians are doing. About 2 months ago, I heard rumors about human slaves being sold in the outer systems." Lieutenant Carl Peterson, the team's intelligence officer, looked up from his data pad. "That's impossible. Our reconnaissance shows no human settlements in Zephyrian space. They would have had to cross the neutral zone to take prisoners." Jake's expression grew darker. "That's because they're not raiding in their own territory, Peterson. They're hitting our outer colonies. The ones your precious alliance has written off as acceptable losses," Peterson frowned. "What colonies?" "All outer settlements are under alliance protection." "Really?" Jack's voice was bitter. "Tell that too. The families from New Montana, or the miners from Shepherd's Rest, or the farmers from Liberty Station, all gone dark in the past 6 months. All listed as destroyed by enemy action in your official reports." The names hit the officers like physical blows. Martinez felt her blood run cold. Those colonies had indeed gone silent, their fate listed as unknown in the intelligence briefings. The Alliance had assumed they were destroyed in standard Zephyrian. "Attacks. Dear God," Martinez whispered. "Command doesn't know." Sullivan was moving from pod to pod, her scanner recording vital signs and taking pictures of identifying marks. "Jack, these children are from different colonies. Look at their clothes, their injuries. This girl has burns that match plasma weapons. This boy has scars from energy whips." Jack nodded grimly. "The Zephyrians have been planning this for months. They hit the colonies fast and hard, taking everyone they could carry. The adults who fought back were killed. The children were drugged and shipped off to slave markets." Brooks was examining the pod systems more closely. "These life support units are modified. They're designed to keep the occupants unconscious for weeks at a time. Someone put a lot of thought into this." "The Zephyrians are smart," Jack said. "They know that conscious children are harder to control. So they keep them asleep until they reach the markets. Then they wake them up just long enough to show them to buyers." Martinez felt sick. She had been fighting the Zephyrians for 10 years, and she thought she knew how evil they could be. But this was something new. This was systematic, planned cruelty on a scale she had never imagined. "How did you find them?" Martinez asked. "How did you get close enough to a Zephyrian slave market to even see these children?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "I have contacts. People who trade in information and favors. Some of them are not entirely human anymore." Peterson looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean there are humans who work for the Zephyrians," Jack said. "Traders who sell out their own kind for money or power. They run some of the slave markets, handle the paperwork, make sure the right people get paid." The silence that followed was deafening. The idea that humans were helping to enslave their own children was almost too horrible to believe. "One of my contacts told me about an auction on Zarian Prime," Jack continued. "A big sale with high-value merchandise. He said there would be human children there, fresh from the colony raids." I knew I had to act. Sullivan looked up from her scanner. "Jack, Zarian Prime is deep in enemy territory. How did you even get there without being caught?" Jack smiled grimly. "The Iron Horse is not as simple as she looks. I've been modifying her for years. She can run silent when she needs to, hide her engine signature, even change her identification codes. I've made runs into enemy space before." "For what?" Martinez demanded. Information mostly. Sometimes medical supplies for colonies that the Alliance has forgotten about. Sometimes I carry messages between families separated by the war. The kind of work that doesn't show up in official records? Peterson was typing rapidly on his datapad. This is incredible. If what you're saying is true, the Zephyrians have been running a systematic enslavement operation for months. The intelligence value alone could change the entire war. Jack turned to face Peterson directly. It's not just intelligence, Lieutenant. It's 43 human children who were about to be sold to the highest bidder. Some of them would have gone to mining operations, where they would have worked until they died. Others would have been sold to private collectors as curiosities. Sullivan's face was pale. Private collectors? Rich aliens who like to keep humans as pets, Jack said, his voice flat. They dress them up, teach them tricks, show them off to their friends. The children usually don't live very long. Martinez felt her hands shaking with rage. She had always known the Zephyrians were enemies, but this was beyond warfare. This was pure evil. How did you get them out? She asked. Jack's expression softened. Slightly. I bid on them, all of them. I emptied my savings account, sold everything I owned, even took out loans from some very dangerous people. It cost me everything, but I managed to outbid the other buyers. And then I loaded them into the pods and ran. I had maybe a 6-hour head start before the buyers figured out who I really was. I've been running ever since, trying to get them to safety. Brooks looked up from his scanner. Where were you taking them? Centauri Station, Jack said. There's a doctor there named Rebecca Parker who runs a clinic for war refugees. She specializes in helping children who have been through trauma. She was expecting us. Martinez holstered her weapon completely. The man standing before her was not a criminal. He was a hero who had risked everything to save innocent lives. Morrison, she said quietly, you realize what you've done is technically treason. You entered enemy space without authorization, engaged in illegal commerce, and compromised ongoing operations? Jack nodded. I know, but I couldn't let those children suffer. Not when I had the power to save them. Martinez looked at the rows of sleeping children, then back at Jack. You did the right thing. The question now is what we do next. Captain Martinez stood in the hidden compartment, surrounded by the sleeping children that Jack Morrison had rescued. The soft hum of the life support systems filled the silence as she tried to process what she had just learned. Her training told her to arrest Morrison and follow protocol. Her heart told her something completely different. These children, she said slowly, they're all from the missing colonies? Jack nodded, his face grim. New Montana, Shepherd's Rest, Liberty Station, and 3 others? The Zephyrians hit them hard and fast, taking everyone they could carry. The adults who fought back were killed on the spot. The children were drugged and loaded onto transport ships. Lieutenant Amy Sullivan was still moving between the pods, her medical scanner recording data on each child. Captain, some of these kids have been unconscious for weeks. The drug levels in their systems are dangerous. They need immediate medical attention. Sergeant Danny Brooks looked up from his examination of the life support systems. The good news is that these pods are keeping them stable. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing. The children are malnourished and traumatized, but they're alive. Jack's expression softened as he looked at the sleeping faces. I had help setting up the pods. Dr. Rebecca Parker sent me the specifications. She's been preparing for this rescue for weeks. Lieutenant Carl Peterson was typing rapidly on his datapad, cross-referencing the missing colony reports with what Jack had told them. This is impossible. According to our intelligence, the Zephyrians don't have the capability to launch raids this deep into human space. Your intelligence is wrong, Jack said flatly. The Zephyrians have been planning this for months, maybe years. They've built new ships, faster than anything we've seen before. They can strike deep into our territory and be gone before our patrol ships even know they're there. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. How do you know all this? Jack hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Because I've been tracking them. For the past year, I've been following Zephyrian movements, mapping their new trade routes, learning their patterns. I knew something big was happening. Why didn't you report this to Alliance Command? Peterson demanded. Jack's laugh was bitter. I tried. I sent reports to 3 different intelligence offices. They all told me the same thing. A cargo runner doesn't have the clearance to access that kind of information. They said I was seeing patterns that didn't exist. Martinez closed her eyes. She had heard similar stories before. The Alliance military was so focused on fighting the war that they sometimes ignored warnings from civilians. It was a flaw in the system that had cost lives before. So you decided to act on your own, Martinez said. What choice did I have? Jack's voice was passionate now. I knew where the children were being held. I knew when the auction was happening. I couldn't just sit back and let them be sold like animals. Sullivan looked up from her scanner. Jack, you said there were other auctions. Are there more children out there? Jack's face darkened. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. The Zephyrians have been building a network of slave markets across their territory. They're not just taking children from the colonies they destroy. They're raiding transport ships, research stations, even some of the outer military bases. The officers exchanged shocked glances. The idea that the enemy was systematically enslaving humans was beyond anything they had imagined. This changes everything, Peterson said quietly. If we can prove that the Zephyrians are taking slaves, it gives the Alliance legal justification for a full-scale invasion of their territory. Legal justification? Jack's voice was dangerous. These are human children being sold as property, and you're worried about legal justification? Martinez stepped between them. Easy, both of you. Peterson, you're right about the political implications. But Morrison, you're right about the moral ones. The question is what we do now. Brooks was examining his scanner readings more carefully. Captain, there's something else. These children aren't just from the missing colonies. Some of them are from places that are supposed to be safe. Look at this girl's medical records. She's from Harmony Station, which is supposed to be under full Alliance protection. Jack nodded grimly. The Zephyrians have been hitting targets throughout human space. They're not just raiding the outer colonies anymore. They're going after anyone they can reach. Sullivan's face was pale. How is that possible? Harmony Station has a full defense fleet. Had, Jack corrected. 3 weeks ago, there was a massive attack on the station. The official report said it was repelled with minimal casualties. But my contacts tell a different story. The Zephyrians broke through the defenses and took prisoners before retreating. Martinez felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about the war was being turned upside down. Morrison, if what you're saying is true, then Alliance Command has been lying to us about the scope of the enemy threat. Not lying, Jack said, just not telling the whole truth. They know the Zephyrians are taking prisoners. They know about the slave markets. But they don't want to cause a panic, so they classify the information and pretend it's not happening. Peterson was shaking his head. This is insane. The Alliance Council would never allow human beings to be enslaved. They would act immediately. Would they? Jack's voice was skeptical. Or would they decide that a few hundred enslaved children are an acceptable loss if it means avoiding a larger war? The silence that followed was uncomfortable. All of them had seen the Alliance make difficult decisions before sacrificing small groups to protect larger populations. But this felt different. This felt like abandonment. Sullivan was checking the vital signs of a young boy who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. This child has scars from energy weapons, recent ones. He was tortured. Jack's hands clenched into fists. The Zephyrians don't just sell the children, they break them first. They want buyers to know that the slaves are completely obedient. Martinez felt rage building in her chest. She had been fighting the Zephyrians for 10 years, but she had always thought of them as honorable enemies. Brutal, yes, but following some kind of warrior code. This was something else entirely. How many markets are there? She asked. At least 12 that I know of, Jack replied. Probably more. They're spread across Zephyrian space, each one specializing in different types of slaves. Children, adults, skilled workers, even some military prisoners. Brooks looked up from his scanner. Military prisoners? I thought the Zephyrians killed all captured soldiers. They used to, Jack said. But now they're keeping the officers alive. They sell them to other enemy species who want to learn human military tactics. The enlisted soldiers are used for hard labor in the mines. Peterson was typing furiously on his data pad. We need to get this information to Alliance Command immediately. This is the biggest intelligence breakthrough of the war. Intelligence breakthrough? Jack's voice was angry. These are people, Peterson. Human beings who are suffering while you're thinking about intelligence value. Martinez held up her hands. Both of you, calm down. We need to think about this. Carefully. Morrison, you're right that we need to help these children and the others who are still captive. But Peterson is also right that this information could help us end the war. Sullivan stood up from examining the children. Captain, whatever we decide, we need to get these kids to proper medical facilities soon. They're stable, but they need care that we can't provide on a patrol ship. Jack nodded. Dr. Parker is waiting for us on Centauri Station. She has a full medical team ready to help these children recover from their trauma. Martinez made her decision. Then that's where we're going. But Morrison, you're going to tell Alliance Command everything you know about the slave markets. Every location, every contact, every piece of information you have. And then what? Jack asked. Martinez looked at the sleeping children, then back at Jack. Then we're going to shut down every slave market in Zephyrian space. And we're going to bring every human prisoner home. The cargo bay of the Iron Horse fell silent except for the steady hum of the life support systems keeping the rescued children alive. Captain Martinez stood among the stasis pods, her mind racing as she tried to make sense of everything she had learned. By every rule in the book, Jack Morrison was a criminal who had broken multiple laws. But the evidence before her painted him as something else entirely. Lieutenant Sullivan, Martinez said finally, breaking the heavy silence. Give me a complete medical assessment of these children. I need to know exactly what we're dealing with. Sullivan moved between the pods with practiced efficiency, her scanner recording vital signs and medical data. Most of them are stable but malnourished. They show signs of dehydration and vitamin deficiency. Several have old injuries that were never properly treated. This boy here has a broken arm that healed wrong. This girl has burned scars on her back. Jack watched Sullivan work, his face tight with controlled anger. The Zephyrians don't waste money on medical care for slaves? They only keep them alive long enough to sell them. Sergeant Brooks was examining the life support systems more closely. These pods are military grade, but they've been modified with civilian medical equipment. Someone put a lot of thought into keeping these kids safe during transport. Dr. Parker helped me design the modifications, Jack explained. She's treated war refugees before. She knew what these children would need to survive the journey. Lieutenant Peterson looked up from his datapad, where he had been recording everything Jack had told them. Morrison, you realize the political implications of what you've done? If the Alliance Council learns that the Zephyrians are systematically enslaving human civilians, it could change the entire course of the war. Jack's expression was grim. The Alliance Council already knows, Peterson. They've known for months. They just don't want to admit it because it would force them to take action they're not ready for. Martinez felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? I mean, I tried to report this months ago, Jack said. I sent intelligence reports to 3 different Alliance offices. I provided evidence, locations, even intercepted communications. They buried every report and told me to stick to running cargo. The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. They all knew how the Alliance bureaucracy worked. Bad news often disappeared into classified files, especially when acting on it would be expensive or dangerous. So you decided to act on your own. Martinez said. Jack nodded. Someone had to. These kids don't have time for political games and committee meetings. Every day they spend in those slave markets, more of them die or disappear forever. Sullivan stood up from examining a young girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. Captain, this child has been drugged for weeks. The psychological trauma alone is going to take months to heal. And that's assuming she gets proper care immediately. What kind of care? Martinez asked. Specialized medical treatment, psychological, counseling, and most importantly, a safe environment where she can recover from what she's been through. These children have seen things that no human being should ever have to witness. Jack stepped forward. Dr. Parker has all of that waiting on Centauri Station. She runs a clinic specifically for war refugees and traumatized children. She's treated victims of Zephyrian attacks before. Brooks looked up from his examination of the pod systems. Captain, if what Morrison says is true about the scope of this slave operation, then these 43 children are just the beginning. There could be hundreds more out there. Peterson was already running calculations on his datapad. The intelligence value of this discovery is enormous. If we can map the Zephyrian slave network, we could plan rescue operations to free the other prisoners. We could also use the information to launch strategic strikes against their facilities. Jack's voice was sharp. These aren't intelligence assets, Peterson. They're human beings. Children who are being tortured and sold like animals while you're making plans and running calculations. Martinez held up her hand to stop the argument. Both of you are right. We need to help these children and the others who are still captive. But we also need to think strategically about how to do the most good. She walked slowly between the pods, looking at the peaceful faces of the sleeping children. Some of them looked so young that they should have been playing with toys instead of fighting for their lives. Others showed the kind of maturity that only came from experiencing horrible things. Morrison, Martinez said quietly, you're still technically under arrest. You've violated multiple laws, entered enemy space without authorization, and engaged in illegal commerce. By the book, I should put you in prison for the rest of your life. Jack's expression didn't change. I understand, Captain, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I know you would, Martinez replied. And that's exactly why I'm not going to arrest you. Peterson looked shocked. Captain, you can't just ignore the law because you agree with what he did. Martinez turned to face her team. Peterson, what's the first rule of the galactic trade? Authority? To protect human commerce and civilian populations throughout Alliance space, Peterson recited. And what have these children been through? Peterson was quiet for a moment. They've been taken from their homes, enslaved, and sold as property. So, isn't Morrison's rescue operation exactly what we're supposed to be doing? Martinez asked. Protecting civilian populations? Sullivan nodded slowly. The captain's right. Our job is to protect people, not to follow bureaucratic rules that prevent us from doing our duty. Brooks was examining his scanner readings again. Captain, there's something else we need to consider. Morrison has contacts throughout the underground. Network? He knows where the slave markets are located, how they operate, who runs them. That information could be invaluable for future rescue operations. Jack looked surprised. You're talking about more rescue missions? Martinez met his eyes. Morrison, you've opened our eyes to something we should have seen months ago. The Alliance has been fighting this war like it's a traditional military conflict. But the Zephyrians aren't just trying to defeat us militarily. They're trying to destroy us as a people. By enslaving our children, Sullivan said quietly. Exactly, Martinez continued. And if we're going to stop them, we need people who understand how their system works. People who have contacts in the underground. People who are willing to take risks that the regular military won't authorize. Peterson was beginning to understand. You're talking about creating an unofficial rescue network. I'm talking about doing whatever it takes to bring our people home, Martinez said firmly. The Alliance Command can debate politics and strategy. All they want, but these children need help now. Jack was quiet for a long moment, looking at the sleeping faces around him. Captain, if we do this, it won't be easy. The Zephyrians are getting smarter. They're increasing security at the slave markets. They're starting to suspect that someone is interfering with their operations, then we'll have to be smarter too, Martinez replied. You know their methods, you understand how they think. With Alliance resources backing you up, we could mount rescue operations that would make a real difference. Sullivan stood up from examining another child. The medical support alone would be worth it. These children need specialized care that only military medical facilities can provide. Brooks nodded. And with proper intelligence gathering, we could identify targets before the children are moved to the markets. We could intercept the transport ships before they reach Zephyrian space. Peterson was typing rapidly on his datapad. The logistics would be complicated, but it's possible. We'd need to operate outside normal channels to avoid bureaucratic interference. Jack looked around at the officers who had come to arrest him and were now planning to help him. You realize what you're suggesting? This would be completely off. The books. If the Alliance found out, you'd all face court-martial, Martinez smiled grimly. Morrison, some things are more important than following orders. Bringing these children home is one of them. 3 hours later, the Iron Horse was flying toward Centauri Station with Captain Martinez's patrol ship as escort. The children had been carefully moved to the patrol ship's medical bay, where Lieutenant Sullivan and her team worked around the clock to stabilize their condition. Jack Morrison sat in the patrol ship's briefing room. No longer a prisoner, but not quite free either. Around the conference table sat Martinez, Peterson, Brooks, and a new face that had arrived by emergency. Transport. Colonel Frank Newman was the sector commander, a grizzled veteran with gray hair and hard eyes who had been fighting the Zephyrians since the war began. He had been hastily briefed about the situation, and his expression showed both anger and disbelief. Morrison, Colonel Newman said, his voice rough from years of shouting orders over battle noise. What you've done is technically treason against the Alliance. You entered enemy space without authorization, engaged in illegal commerce with hostile forces, and compromised ongoing military operations. Jack nodded calmly. I understand that, sir. But, Newman continued, leaning forward in his chair, you've also provided us with the most significant intelligence breakthrough of this war. These children are living proof that the Zephyrians have crossed a line that even their own allies won't accept. Martinez placed a datapad on the table. Colonel, I've compiled everything Morrison has told us about the slave network. 12. Confirmed markets, transport routes, key personnel, even financial information about how the operation is funded. Newman picked up the datapad and scrolled through the information. His expression grew darker with every page. Dear God, this is systematic. They're not just taking prisoners of war anymore. They're deliberately targeting civilian populations for enslavement. It gets worse, Jack said quietly. My contacts tell me they're expanding the operation. They're building new facilities, training more slavers, even negotiating with other enemy species to create a galaxy-wide slave trade. Peterson looked up from his own datapad. Sir, if we can present this evidence to the Alliance Council, it would give us justification for a full-scale invasion of Zephyrian space. The galactic community would support us completely. Newman nodded slowly. You're right, Peterson. But an invasion would take months to plan and years to execute. How many more children will be enslaved while we're organizing political support? Brooks had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Sir, what if we don't wait for the Alliance? Bureaucracy? What if we start our own rescue operations immediately? Explain, Newman said. Martinez leaned forward. Colonel, Morrison has the contacts and knowledge we need to locate the children. We have the military resources to mount rescue missions. If we work together outside normal channels, we could start saving lives immediately. Newman was quiet for a long moment, considering the implications. Captain, what you're suggesting is completely outside the chain of command. If this went wrong, all of our careers would be over. With respect, sir, Martinez replied, some things are more important than careers. These are human children being sold as property. If we don't act, who will? Jack watched the officers debate his fate and the fate of hundreds of enslaved children. He had spent weeks planning the rescue of 43 kids, knowing it might cost him everything. Now these military officers were considering risking their own futures to help him save even more. Colonel, Jack said quietly, I'm going back anyway. With or without Alliance support, I'm going to find those other children and bring them home. The only question is whether you want to help me do it right. Newman studied Jack's face. You realize the Zephyrians know about you now? They know someone is interfering with their slave operation. Going back would be suicide. Jack shrugged. Maybe, but leaving those kids to suffer would be worse than suicide. It would be abandonment. Sullivan entered the briefing room, her medical uniform stained with exhaustion. Colonel, I thought you should know, we've managed to wake up 3 of the children safely. They're traumatized and confused, but they're talking. What are they saying? Martinez asked. They're asking for their parents, Sullivan said, her voice thick with emotion. They don't understand what happened to their families or why they're on a ship instead of at home. But they're also talking about other children they saw in the slave markets, hundreds of them. Newman stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Morrison, your contacts in the underground. How reliable are they? Reliable enough, Jack replied. They've never given me bad information, and they hate the Zephyrians as much as we do. Some of them are humans who escaped from the slave markets themselves, and they would work with Alliance personnel? Jack considered this. If those personnel were willing to work outside the system, yes. But if you try to do this through official channels, my contacts will disappear. They don't trust governments or militaries. Brooks was studying a star chart on his datapad. Sir, if we could coordinate with Morrison's network, we could identify targets and plan rescue missions without going through Alliance command. We could use our resources to support operations that are already being planned. Peterson nodded. The intelligence value would be enormous. Every rescue mission would give us more information about how the slave network operates. We could map their entire organization. Newman turned back to the table. Morrison, if we do this, you would be working with Alliance personnel on an ongoing basis. You would have access to military resources, but you would also have to follow certain protocols. What kind of protocols? Jack asked suspiciously. Safety protocols, Martinez said. Mission planning, backup support, proper medical care for rescued prisoners. We're not going to let you go back into enemy space alone with just your ship and your courage. Sullivan sat down at the table. The children we've rescued need ongoing care, but they also need to know that other children are being saved. It would help their recovery to know that their suffering had meaning. Jack was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the sleeping children in the medical bay and the hundreds more still trapped in Zephyrian slave markets. What exactly are you proposing? Newman sat back down. We're proposing a joint operation. You provide the intelligence and contacts. We provide the military support and resources. Together, we mount rescue missions to free as many prisoners as possible. Completely off the books? Jack asked. Completely off the books, Newman confirmed. This conversation never happened. These rescue missions never happened. As far as Alliance Command knows, we're conducting routine patrol operations in our assigned sectors, Martinez smiled. And if anyone asks how we keep finding escaped prisoners floating in space, we'll tell them we got lucky. Brooks laughed. Very lucky, repeatedly. Jack looked around the table at the faces of the officers who had tried to arrest him only hours before. They were offering to risk everything to help him save children they had never met. It was exactly the kind of crazy, dangerous, necessary thing that humans did when their backs were against the wall. All right, Jack said finally, but we do this my way. No military protocols that slow us down. No chain of command that prevents us from acting when we need to. And when we find those kids, we bring them home no matter what the cost. Newman extended his hand across the table. Deal, welcome to the war effort, Jack Morrison. As they shook hands, Jack realized his days as a simple cargo runner were over forever. He was about to become something he had never expected, humanity's best hope for bringing their lost children home from the darkness of enemy space. The Iron Horse would fly again, but this time she wouldn't be carrying cargo. She would be carrying The future of human resistance against an enemy that had made the fatal mistake of underestimating how far humans would go to protect their young outside the viewport. The stars waited. Somewhere among them, hundreds of human children were counting on rescue that they didn't even know was coming. Jack Morrison intended to make sure they didn't wait much longer.